GM and G Stash. We are live for episode 4 of the SEDA Stash series, which I'm super excited for because we've been sort of spending our time in episode 1, 2, and 3 a little bit deeper in the stack, looking at some of the infra from universal liquidity, diving into MEV, solvers, intents, and ARS. And now we're coming up the stack to be joined with Mayur from Arcana, who are abstracting the account complexities, which of course is the topic of the discussion today. And joining us as always is Jasper as well. So thank you, Mayur, and thank you, Jasper, for joining. Super excited for today's conversation, because if anybody who's listening along wants to actually get firsthand tangible experience of what we mean when we say abstracting the account complexities, Mayur, you've just actually launched your first tangible product for Arcana. So a part of your introduction, I would love, a little bit of intro on yourself, and then point the people to where they need to go as they can play along while they listen to the stream.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks. Extremely glad to be here and talk all things chain abstraction with you guys. I'm Mayur. I'm the founder and CEO here at Arcana. We've been doing a bunch of abstraction related stuff for a while now. We started out doing wallet abstractions, trying to hide the private key and the seed phrase from the user, typical wallet as a service product. Then we went on to kind of we ended up doing gas abstractions where developers could pay gas fees on behalf of their users, and almost logically we've arrived at chain abstraction, where basically we've helped users go from landing page to home page with the wallet abstraction, then do a bunch of interactions on the home page through the gas abstraction, and finally spend as easily as possible on the checkout page with chain abstraction. So that's the goal, and that's what we're here to do. And yes, you're absolutely right, Matt. We just put out a product. I think it's about time that we get to shipping season with chain abstraction. There's quite a bit of hype in niches and in our own little quaint corners, but it's time to unleash this on the world. So that's what we've aimed to do with this product. It's essentially like an EOA wallet. It works just like your Rabi, MetaMask, etc. But it's the world's first sort of chain abstracted wallet. What it does is it essentially aggregates your asset balances across different chains and allows you to spend those asset balances as one near instantly. And that, I think, is the primary goal of chain abstraction from the user perspective. And that's what we're hoping to achieve with this product. This is a wallet extension that is available on the Chrome store. You can head over to our website and you'll find the link to the Chrome web store from where you can download it and start trying it out.
Jasper, you're going to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if you could take us through sort of like the flow of when you send a transaction, what needs to happen on sort of like the back end in order for you to not know what chain you're interacting with necessarily, or where your balances live. And then a secondary question that probably plays into that is sort of like, where do the balances live? Do they live on the or like on the sort of like target chains, and are the balances aggregated into like a single number somewhere? Does that number live somewhere, or is it just front end abstraction?
Yeah, so from the get-go, like our initial idea was to actually do smart accounts and do ERC-4337 sort of like smart contract wallets, primarily because of the resource lock capabilities that they afford you. Resource lock, for those people who don't really get it, basically allows for a solver to front liquidity without actually needing to move money anywhere. And that was one of the big draws, but we then changed to essentially a complete EOA focus, where we said, we want to support EOAs and EOAs only to start with. A couple of reasons here. Primary reason being the fact that ERC-4337, I think, is not the most shining EIPs that exist within the Ethereum ecosystem. I think it has not seen adoption, and with good reason. I'd like to think so, and because primarily this is probably for another time, but essentially we felt like 4337 and the proponents of it essentially ended up causing more problems than actually solving things like it seems to be able to solve. And generally speaking, I think gas abstraction needs to be upstream of applications, and it needs to be something enshrined in the protocol. So once we made that decision to basically say we'll go EOA first, then it obviously now means that all of the funds actually resides in the user's wallet. They don't reside in any sort of like escrow or like a resource lock, any of those sorts of things, at least not for now, because I don't think there are great ways to do resource lock outside of smart contract accounts at the moment. And so the flow is essentially the user comes and is able to kind of just like, for example, with our wallet, is able to come import an existing EOA, which would be typically the case for a lot of people who actually have fragmented liquidity. And once they kind of import it, we are able to kind of very much like how like a Zerion or any of these guys who show you your portfolio across chains are able to kind of show this unified view to the user where we take individual assets, whether it's USDC, USDT, ETH, Polygon, or wrapped ETH, and we aggregate those asset balances across a bunch of chains that we support, which to start with is Base, Arbitrum, Optimism, ETH, and Polygon. And once the user has this view, much like how Zero shows you, then what happens is that a user can actually go to one of a bunch of these DeFi apps that we already have support for. For example, we have support for Aave, Uniswap, Jumper, Polymarket, and Hyperliquid. So let's say a user goes to Hyperliquid, and Hyperliquid is obviously one of the most popular perp dexes there is, but also curiously, it accepts only USDC on the Arbitrum chain. And so if a user wanted to actually deposit USDC to actually start trading, which is the first step to do anything on Hyperliquid, they would obviously need to have USDC on Arbitrum. So what we enable is basically allowing the user's assets to be spent from any source chain. And these assets are essentially collected into what we call Arcana vaults. These are essentially escrow contracts. And this is on the fly when the user expresses an intent to spend USDC on Arbitrum, as in the case of a Hyperliquid deposit. And once the user expresses that intent, we initiate these sort of like collections from user wallets across different chains. Let's say the user has funds on Optimism and Base, USDC on Optimism and Base. So these funds would then get collected, and as soon as these escrows are done, we have like a solver network where basically these guys get informed that the deposits are indeed done. They verify themselves that the deposits were done and the funds are indeed escrowed, so the user cannot now double spend. And then what you have is basically the solvers get into this race to fill my intent, which is to get this USDC on Hyperliquid, on basically on Arbitrum, to be able to deposit onto Hyperliquid. And one of the solvers wins out. My intent is now fulfilled. I have the funds that I've intended to spend on Hyperliquid now available to me. All this takes roughly about 20 seconds, and then voila, I'm able to do my deposit and actually get started on working with Hyperliquid. So that is like 10,000 foot overview of the flow. Happy to jump into any specific details.
Very interesting. So you decided, screw smart accounts, they're not seeing adoption. For some reason, EOAs are super sticky. It's probably because everybody that's in the space right now is a power user. They're fine with EOAs. they're so used to shit UX that they're like, at least the people that actually have the money, that they're like, I'd rather just keep it in this thing I know and trust instead of like porting it over to some new account thing that I now have to find, like as long as MetaMask, etc., don't allow you to have a one-click migrate button that has some real advantage. That makes total sense. And it's also interesting that you mentioned that you have sort of like these escrows on the origin chains, right? So just practical example and sort of like going into the trade-offs here. If we have USDC on, let's say, Base, and we have USDC on Blast, or I don't know, ETH on Base and Blast, then we need USDC deposited onto Hyperliquid on Arbitrum. Then you deposit it on these origin chains into the escrow contracts, and then you need to wait for some finality there, or solvers can take finality risk, but they at least need to know that the transaction has been included and the nonce is locked, right? Or the funds are there. And then they deposit on the destination chain. My first two questions would be, is it correct then, because you don't get to sort of like nonce lock for cross-chain transactions, that the trade-off you choose here is like, hey, we want to get to market quickly, we want to get to market with EOAs, people won't care. So having to wait for sort of like origin chain finality plus destination chain finality, or at least inclusion, is a worthy trade-off that you made, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is something that we've spoken to a bunch of people who we think are good candidates to be solvers. And this is a trade-off that they're comfortable doing, and they in fact do it even today. They do it on Across, they do it on Uniswap, and a bunch of other places. And this is a fair, it was a fair sort of thing that we're not like fully validated, but we're seeing it in the wild. It's available in the market. We are seeing like legitimate like solver candidates, like the market makers of the world, who I think are like the perfect sort of people to be able to like become solvers, because end of the day, like you rightly said, they have to price in that risk of reorg on one of these chains and things like that, and basically be able to kind of say, yeah, you know, I've seen this, my RPC is telling me this deposit is done, and now I will get into this race. But then again, it's up to these guys. They can go ahead and say, you know, I'll wait for 3 blocks.
Of course.
Or something to that effect.
Yeah, it's up to the solver to have like finality risk appetite. So they can choose it themselves, and it gives them a competitive edge.
Exactly. So this is what, like, these are some of the things we leave open for solvers to kind of decide themselves. But yeah, once you're able to kind of get these funds escrowed, which is probably like the one downside of EOS, that you have to wait for that to happen. But on most L2s, that's really not a very time-consuming process. And then once you have that, then it's a very straightforward thing. And primarily, sorry, but the reason why I said that, you know, we of course wanted to go to market fast, but is that we've seen in the 3 years that we've been building, is that there is this slight tendency for teams to sort of over-optimize on the best possible product that you can build and put out there. And what we've also noticed is that many times, you know, there'll be this person who just doesn't care that much about building the best product, ships, gets the distribution, and basically eats your lunch, right? And that is something that we didn't want to kind of see repeat. It's happened to us and in the past, and so we definitely felt like, you know, going to market early is important, but also just generally from an industry perspective, I think it's very important to put out products and, you know, start putting these things into people's hands, because I've probably done over 1,000 demos of our wallet to different people at events and on calls and things like that. And there is this very palpable sort of aha moment when they see chain abstraction in action. And that is something that, you know, we were very keen to put into people's hands and let them experience firsthand, because that, I think, just takes the industry forward in general.
Definitely. It's sort of like the aha moment when you first use a chain abstracted app. One more question, then I'll pass it to you, Matt. When you have sort of like this aggregated balance and you're trying to spend, but you go over the balance that would be available on one origin chain, do you pick the origin chain that you want to have your assets bridged in from? So if you have assets on base and ETH, you'd have to do 2 transactions essentially and two user inputs, or is there a way around that?
Yeah. So right now as a design principle within the team, what we've said is that we're going to go with good defaults, and so you can have multiple sources for your spend. And what we essentially optimize for is we check, like, is it an L2, and is it an L2 with lower fees, and that becomes highest priority. So ETH, taking your funds from ETH is the lowest possible priority. It's something we try and avoid wherever possible. But that's sort of like the approach we're taking, of like presenting the user with good defaults for now. But obviously, what we want to be able to do going forward is present good defaults, but give users the option to be able to say, hey, no, don't touch my funds on this chain. Instead, take it from this. That obviously would perhaps change my fee. And if I'm okay with the fee that is now presented as a result of this change, then that's perfectly fine. And that's something that we definitely want to allow.
Awesome. Thank you.
You mentioned before 20 seconds it all happened in. I had to play around today. My first transaction was 8.5 seconds. The seconds were around 7.4 seconds. And I was purposely fragmenting myself. So I was using Jumper Exchange. I had about $100 on base, I think. So I took $10 and I split it, 50 cents on whatever chain. And then I went over and I minted myself a rehash podcast NFT, which is on base. And I used the unified balance to do so. And it was super cool to have that experience. As I had that experience after reading your blog, which I suggest people go and read, this kind of comparison between EOAs, SEAs, and this hybrid approach. And SEAs obviously haven't been getting the kind of adoption that people thought they might. They've had whiz-bang marketing and a great narrative kind of put around them. The user experience has sort of, reign supreme as always, the actual reality of using these things for the current climate. And my experience with Arcana today was, it was super flexible. Like it just felt very smooth, and I've used other wallets out there. There's a few that have gone to beta or, put some sort of product out in the last couple of months. It's super exciting. I just want to get your take on what is the landscape right now with EOAs versus SEAs, and then this hybrid account idea, and where do you guys sit in that? Because you're talking about EOAs, but it's almost like you're hybrid now with this sort of chain abstraction capabilities. It doesn't feel like MetaMask, for example.
Yeah, no, of course. I think in general, the biggest draw for me with like smart contract accounts, there are two things that stand out. One is obviously by being able to batch transactions, right? So you're telling the user, click once, a bunch of things will happen. And the other is very clearly this resource lock capability. The fact that it sits in a smart contract, your funds sit in a smart contract, and you can have like a custom SCA that basically does not allow you to spend while you are committing to spend elsewhere, for example, right? So basically, how do you stop the user from double spending? Like, I have funds on base, I want to spend them on optimism, but I try and do them at two different places. And how do you sort of do that is basically put in a resource lock on the funds while one of those transactions that first got committed to is in action. And it makes it very simple to kind of, make that possible, as opposed to, pulling funds out of the user's wallet at runtime and things like that. You can very optimistically start to push like fulfillments of intents. So those are the two big draws, and which is great. But some of the fundamental issues in terms of experience that don't get talked about with SEAs is when a smart account, no, most people don't have smart accounts. 99% of people don't have smart accounts, and when you don't have one, you have to create one, and when you create one, you then need to kind of start funding it, and then you need to start to use it. And most people have simply not reached that point where their liquidity is fragmented across multiple, like one smart account, but on multiple chains. That simply has not happened to the extent where it becomes like a viable use case to solve for today. And there is obviously this other issue where, ERC 4337 sort of like implementations are non-portable. Like my account I create on one of these apps that has, integrated with one of these solution providers simply won't work on another. This is something that I like about what the guys at Particle are doing with their universal accounts, is that you're able to kind of port this smart contract wallet from app to app, which is cool. But the general idea is that you have no funds, you need to have funds, and those need to be fragmented enough for you to be actually need to be able to do this. And that problem doesn't exist today with most people who have SCAs. And that's what we looked at, and we said, most people who use DeFi today are using them with EOAs because half of them don't even trust like all these wonderful UX sort of things that people are doing. They trust their the good old MetaMask, or in some cases Rabi and things like that, and that's what they want to use. And that's where their liquidity is fragmented, and these are the people who will actually sort of appreciate it. So which is why we sort of went down this route. But we are extremely optimistic when it comes to what 7702 has to offer, and how at runtime you can basically have an EOA with SCA capabilities. And that starts to kind of, put us into this sort of more hybrid sort of space where we continue to support EOAs. But now these resource lock capabilities and all these other wonderful benefits that you get from smart contract accounts in general are now available to any user with an EOA without all the hassle of learning about these new sort of like primitive moving funds, etc., etc.
What's the difference between like a resource lock in a smart contract account setup and then using an escrow contract in your setup? It feels like very much the same thing. I know that the resource locks is built into the smart contract, into the smart contract account, right? Is kind of how it's been framed.
Yeah.
But then, Jasper, go.
I think to me, it would be that the resource lock is like fully modular, can be anything, right? The resource lock could be a multi-sig with a TEE. It could be a multi-sig with Coinbase, for example, if you're talking about Base. And I think what makes that attractive is, in theory, you can have like very consistent promises across like any L1 or L2 that all come from sort of like whatever cosigner you pick for your resource lock. But curious what you think about that, Mayur. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's about like at what, like the freedom, like a couple of things. I think it's freedom and fidelity. I think number one is like, with just an EOA, if I don't like a wallet that enables chain abstraction, if I don't like an app that enables chain abstraction and things like that, I just move. My EOA is with me. I don't have to do anything in particular, right? My funds are taken from me only when I express an explicit intent to spend, which is like in most cases, right? When you want to spend, your money moves out of your wallet. And I think that is like the primary differentiator. But I think also in terms of like fidelity, I think Jasper was touching on it, and how it can be these various types of ways in which you can do this. But that curtails like the freedom of me being able to kind of move out easily. And so you now perhaps have to like, I don't want to sound like I know everything about these resource lock implementations, because I think it's quite early. But the people are resorting to need to do like like forced withdrawals, making this possible, that opens up a whole can of worms when it comes to general security and those sorts of things. Needs to be done correctly and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's sort of like the fundamental difference, because I think there are trust assumptions in both cases. Like anything that's a resource log, like Jasper mentioned, like a multi-sig with a TEE, or an MPC network, there are trust assumptions there. Similarly, funds being taken from like my wallet, there are trust assumptions over here as well. Where, like, is it being taken for the right reason? Is the amounts correct? And all of those sorts of things is something that every user should be able to kind of needs to know that this is what is at stake. But I think it's just a question of like being able to kind of build that trust and social proof over a period of time, and then everything's of course open source, verifiable, and yeah. So that I think is the primary difference.
Makes sense. I saw on the Twitter that there's an Arcana chain, or there will be.
Yeah.
Where does it come in this flow?
So the chain is essentially, it's a Cosmos chain. It's like an app chain that we built on Cosmos. It's in testnet right now, and it's what essentially orchestrates user EOAs with these Arcana vaults which are essentially smart contracts on different chains, the solvers and the settlements that they need to receive and things like that. So its job is essentially like a glorified indexer / state machine, essentially, which is what blockchains are essentially. And what it does is it becomes like the point of truth in this entire system. So it doesn't really participate. Once a user submits an intent, it actually goes to our chain and it gets recorded as an intent that now needs to be fulfilled. So now on chain, and then thereafter it does not interfere in the user's entire flow, because that would just like lessen the UX. But where it starts to come into the picture is for settlements to solvers. So once, let's say I have 10 USDC on Arbitrum, I want to spend it on Optimism. My 10 USDC gets escrowed into an Arcana vault on Arbitrum. Solver funds me the 10 USDC on Optimism. And this whole thing is gotten done in a matter of seconds and everyone's happy. But now the solver obviously needs to be reconciled with, settled with. And so our chain's job is to essentially be able to kind of get this so-called off-chain data that exists, like this deposit that happened from the user onto the Arcana vault, the fill that happened by the solver to the user, and bring this data on-chain, reconcile all of this, and over a period of time, gather all these sort of reconciliations that are due to various solvers on various chains for various assets, and initiate these settlements. And so the way we do it, and the reason why we chose Cosmos, is that basically Cosmos gives you this new primitive to be able to get off-chain data on-chain through something called vote extensions. So you now have you have a proposer typically in your Cosmos chain that is able to kind of propose blocks, but can also propose a vote extension to say that, hey, I found this deposit on Arbitrum of 10 USDC. And now all the other validators essentially start to also kind of check if this indeed did happen. And to the validators, this is off-chain data, and they all come back, and if a majority of them, and this is basically then put to consensus, where if a majority of them agree that this 10 USDC deposit did happen, then that deposit is then logged against the initial intent that the user created, saying that, okay, so the user had funds on Arbitrum, wanted to spend it on Optimism, and and here is this proof of deposit that we all agree on. And similarly for the fill, saying that, okay, for this intent for which there was a deposit, here is a fill by this solver, and we all agree that this did happen. And now the state is is filled, and it's happened through consensus. And then a settlement ensues where the solver basically says, the chain basically says, this solver is now due settlements to the tune of X USDC on say Arbitrum, and those get processed. So basically, the whatever is collected plus the solver fee is basically transferred off, and this also allows us to this gap time between like the epoch between like two settlements allows us to basically also net off these spends. So that's the role of the chain.
And how do you get because the settlement needs to happen, and sorry if you touched on this and I missed it, but it needs to happen on sort of like the chain where the funds were escrowed, right? So how do you get that proof or the sort of like the okay from the Arcana network to the intent origin chain?
So, sorry, can you restate that?
So there's an escrow on an origin chain, right? And the escrow needs to be unlocked and paid out to the solver. Or do funds live on Arcana chain? I don't think so, right? Or do receipts of the funds? No. Okay. So the escrow needs to know when it is allowed to pay out to whom. And my question is sort of like, how do you get that data there in a tamper-proof way?
So an Arcana full node essentially is like a validator who runs a full node. Actually comprises two pieces. One is the Cosmos SDK bits, which are actually run the chain, and then we also have like an MPC network that we've sort of like custom built, where basically based off of like state information that the validators hold, they come together to do an MPC threshold signature. And if enough of them come together, it results in a particular signature from a particular public key. And this is what the escrow contracts are verifying when they get told to be able to kind of, send these out. So it's definitely like largely a crypto economic sort of like proof, as opposed to like an absolute cryptographic proof. This is something that we are working to kind of add boost essentially with cryptographic security as well, and we're working with a couple of partners, guys at Avail, and a couple of other people to try and devise these sort of ways in which we can basically enhance this security.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, if you get fast settlement, it doesn't really matter that much because it's only in-flight intents that you need to secure economically. So yeah, I think it's fine.
Can we zoom in on that? Actually, that's something I wanted to bring up was around kind of the landscape for solver settlement. Here, we've had some people on previous episodes, on previous series, talking around this. I think you mentioned, am I correct in saying it was an optimistic kind of process here with the...
No,
I missed that. That was something else you were talking about.
Proof of stake.
Proof of stake, yeah, okay. What's the solver settlement time on the Arcana network? How long does that settlement period take?
Yeah, so this is not set in stone at the moment, but we currently do like every 2 hours or so. This is something I think you have to kind of figure out and keep optimizing for as you go, depending on what solvers want themselves, what sort of volumes you're seeing, and those sorts of things. So this is definitely something that we are looking to kind of figure out as we go. But for now, it's like roughly around 2 hours, and that's, I think, reasonable at good volumes and at some scale. That does allow for pretty good amount of netting to happen, which basically improves the capital efficiency of a system like this.
How do you go about adding kind of new chains into this as well? And does that affect the solver settlement time at all? Like, let's say if we're going outside of the EVM, something that Tabasco from Particle Network and I speak about. I've been speaking with the guys at Cluster. A lot of the people in some of the groups that you're in as well around this kind of idea of, what do these solutions look like as we go outside of the EVM? Obviously, alt VMs are picking up a lot of mind share in the town hall of crypto at the moment. So could you speak a little bit about like how do you go about adding new chains in, and then what does that mean for this solver settlement window as well? Is that affected going outside of the EVM as well?
Yeah, so for us, it's a bunch of functional stuff that we need to be able to do. One is obviously having these sort of Arcana vaults, essentially like smart contracts on these chains. So for now, we can only support like programmable like chains, like pure Bitcoin. We cannot support at the moment because you can't deploy a smart contract there. But I'm sure there'll be a way around that through one of these other guys. Then apart from that, obviously ensuring that the protocol itself, the chain that is running, knows about what chain is now also being supported, what are the assets that are being supported on this particular chain, and of course making it available on the front end, which I think is less of a problem, ensuring RPCs and all of those sorts of things, so you're able to sort of unify balances. But the functional, like outside of like the sort of functional aspect, I think like the operational stuff of actually ensuring liquidity on a particular route is the harder part to kind of ensure, because you can have like, you don't even need like a very large solver network to bootstrap something like what we are building at the moment. And I say this with like full knowledge of the fact that there is a lot of hue and cry within our circles, especially of solver centralization. But I think it's definitely something not something that we worry about at the moment for multiple reasons. But getting a solver to support a particular route, like for example, if you wanted to support, say, one of the move-based chains tomorrow, right? And if we had to do that, the parts about like deploying like a Arcana vault, adding details to our protocol, and making sure the protocol is aware of this particular chain, making changes on the front end is easier. But ensuring that there is liquidity on a route, like let's say for example, something like Aptos, and if so, the route would be like, say, the user wants to spend stable coins that they hold, USDC, USDT, on say one of the EVML2s, and wants to spend APT tokens to, I don't know, liquid stake or something to that effect on the Aptos chain. So now ensuring that there is this liquidity for the user on this particular route, and ensuring that there is liquidity back, is what is, I think, extremely important to kind of ensure. There are sort of social ways to do this at the moment, but like permissionless ways to be able to do this, I haven't seen anything as of now, and that I think is the more crucial part. But I think like most of these people are very open to the idea of, or like these foundations that run these chains, or these projects that are launching app chains, very open to the idea of themselves becoming solvers on these routes, and ensuring that they have a two-way route in and out.
Yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense. We talked a bit about this actually last week, I think, with the guys from Kalani and Fastlane. It's super interesting with the more app chains that are coming through. Jasper, I want to just double down on this idea for me of adding in new chains, new routes popping up, because I mean oracles fit into this, and then I'd love to get your take, Mayur, on kind of how you guys are looking at using oracles. But it's a super interesting conversation right now as we move to this app chain era. And I always think about this when I'm using universal accounts, whether it's Arcana, I've played with like the One Balance one, Particle Network as well. Like they're going to be revolutionary for users. That is not an argument, right? Like these are just, they're such great UXs. What I had playing with Arcana today was absolutely phenomenal. Then the question sort of comes down to those of us that are in the infra stack is like, it always seems to come back to solvers and the solver landscape, right? Like how do we get these routes to be able to just plug chains in to the universal accounts, right? This is where I keep coming back every time we do an episode on this. I keep going back to this solver landscape. So Jasper, I'd love to, like, just to help clear that up for me of like where sort of SEDA fits in for settlement around solvers, and then Mayur, I'd love for you to get your take on sort of that landscape as well.
Yeah, so what we try to do is sort of like create these data packets, right? That's like a batch of data. It can be anything. It can be cross-chain data. It can be something else. And the thing is that you can deploy a smart contract that can sort of like verify that this batch has not been tampered with by a solver on any destination chain for any VM, right? So we use like sort of like cryptographic primitives there for getting the data and verifying the data. We use crypto-economic primitives. Yeah, so for us, the thing is like, if somebody's building a chain abstraction protocol and they use SEDA for some of the settlement or resource logs or wherever, whether that's on Arcana or whether it's on a destination chain somewhere else, our goal is to just create sort of like a single standard that allows you to sort of like prove data on any of these chains that hopefully solvers will get familiarized with, so that they know that they can support new routes relatively quickly, as long as there is sort of like a SEDA program available that they can run to verify state of any of these destination chains, right? And the goal there really is that if an Arcana wants to, or another chain abstraction protocol wants to support a new chain, they don't need to wait for their own validator set or an external Oracle, etc., to add support, upgrade the network in order to support these new chains. They can simply refer to like sort of like the SEDA expected SEDA packets on these destination chains, and sort of like permissionlessly launch across multiple chains. And yeah, their solvers will just have to fetch the resource lock, unlock, or the settlement data from the same place they always fetch it to. They just need to deliver it to a different chain. But yeah, there it will be verified in the same way. So that is how I see things. So yeah, we're just trying to standardize some of these processes, and I think that that's probably helpful. I also still think that, I mean, Mayur, I don't know if you heard the spaces we had with the Fastlane and Kalani guys last time, but I said that solvers have sort of like become this sort of like cop-out answer for a lot of people building in our space, intense space, where it used to be ZK, right? Like, oh, how do you handle this like super hard scaling problem? People were like, oh, we'll use ZK. And then because that's such a complex, unknown, broad subject, people stop asking questions and be like, oh, cool, ZK. Now people, I feel like with intents, they have the same question, like, oh, how do you get the data delivered? How do you support many routes? Blah, blah. And they say, oh, solvers will handle it, right? Like sort of like it's out of our hands. Like we just like throw this like term that everybody knows. It's super broad and vague. And then people will just say, oh, solvers. Yeah, makes sense. Right. So for me, it's also still one of the more unanswered sort of technical challenges of our space. So yeah, super curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, but before that, I'm also curious to learn how is SEDA different from like your typical GMP in terms of like messages going from one chain to another, which is essentially what your data packets are. And
yeah,
but if there is nuance here, please feel free to explain.
Yeah, so yeah, there's nuance. I think a very big difference here is that SEDA is not just a cross-chain messaging network, right? It's essentially a fully programmable data stack that allows users to come in and write specific Oracle feeds that make sense for their use case. And so that means that it can be like, hey, I want to query Arcana chain state, or I want to query Optimism chain state, or I want to see if a transaction was included in a certain block, and if the if it has had enough block confirmations, etc. Like these are things you can program into the data packet and sort of like program it into like, hey, just return true or false, and that's all I need to know for a certain ID, right? So that's one thing you do, but it can also create like long tail price feeds or price feeds that are, I don't know, have like different sort of like different algorithms than you'd usually see. It aggregates more sources. It creates transparency there as well. And then finally, things like real world assets, you can talk to an LLM from a smart contract. Like it's really broad. You can sort of like send any data as long as it isn't on your origin chain, and you can sort of like fetch that, right? But that also counts for cross-chain state.
Understood. So I can, it's like me being able to build custom feeds. And I think the keyword, what you guys also try and sort of like say quite a bit, is do so permissionlessly. Like I don't need to go to a chain link, pay them a bunch of money, and we wait for a bunch of time for them to add us into the roadmap and for all of this to be possible.
Exactly. And then additionally, there's like, for where it's cool for cross-chain messaging as well, it's like you don't need, you can sort of like deploy your own verifier, right? Or your own attestation mechanism, right? So we're working with the Hyperlane team, for example, because they have like this relay network that allows you to bridge messages cross-chain. But it's sort of like, it's often still, I don't know, like they have different modules to do that, but I think SEDA is sort of like a permissionless, decentralized module or standard to do that. It's quite cool.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, God knows that we've done all sorts of things to ensure that our state machine, which is this chain, has access to this data and correct data, verifiable data, and all of those sorts of things. And we still have some ways to go to kind of keep improving things there. This sounds extremely interesting and something that I think we should talk a bit more about, because I strongly believe like chain abstraction protocols in general, any sort of solution built in the space, these are all extremely data hungry, and they could do with the availability of verifiable data, which is something about you guys that has always intrigued me. I'm definitely going to use this opportunity for us to kind of try and talk a bit more deeper about what we're trying to do. But I think, Matt, your original question was just generally this app chain sort of landscape and what we're seeing here and those sorts of things, if I'm not wrong, correct?
The original question, sort of the original point, was around, with this app chain expansion, moving into this app chain era. Arcana, is going to be stands to be a single portal, single point of entry for the user to come into the space. And I think that there's really no question around that. The experience I had today is just very, very clean. So then the question always comes down the stack to the solver landscape, and being able to make these pathways to new app chains, whether they're in the EVM or the alt VM. And I was just curious about like kind of how you guys are thinking about that at Arcana, how you see the solver landscape. Like Jasper said, it's such an easy way to just go, solvers will do it. But it's becoming more and more of a conversation that everyone's having in the industry. So very curious to see, how you guys are looking to unpack that.
Yeah, I think, the place where most people get sort of like stuck, I've noticed, is when everyone starts to, from the get-go, optimize on the number of solvers. And that, I think, can be extremely debilitating in terms of, if you are trying to sit and say that, we need to have at least 20 solvers, 50 solvers, whatever that number is, you're not going to get there, at least not to start out with. You need to be able to kind of, lessen that expectation. And the second you do that, I think the horizons start to open up significantly for you to be able to start supporting more chains and more assets. And the downside of this is, obviously, well known. Like over a period of time, you could basically have one solver supporting one route, and then they could get monopolistic. But the fact remains that if the fees are too high compared to, like, say, bridging, and people will basically inconvenience themselves because it is much cheaper. And I think, markets will have a way to kind of figure out what is the right price that people are paying for this convenience, where I don't have to switch context, go to a bridge, do everything, come back to where I was, and continue to do what I was doing. And this, I think, unless there's someone actually really malicious, with malicious intent, I don't think, like, even a single solver setup will eventually become like such a hazard for the user, especially on the user experience, to not be able to support something like, for example, a brand new app chain that just launches has its own custom token that they want you to spend, but obviously no one's going to go buy that token. But if the team themselves, who are obviously sitting on inventory of their token, also supply the inventory on the other side, which is, let's say, a stable coin, you can open up this route very simply and in a straightforward way. And these people are not incentivized to, charge exorbitant fees. The only thing they need to make sure is that there's a way back for the user, which is what I was talking about earlier. Is that if I go and want to try out this app chain, which happens to be this game, and they have the specific token for me to be able to kind of, use to do something, but if chain abstraction exists, then I can actually go on this route from USDC on Arbitrum, Optimism, whatever, to this app chain's native token, be able to spend, have that experience, and then once I'm done, be able to kind of, find my way back. And as long as that is available, and there is no, like people are not predatory, because this is going to become well known. This is all public information, and so there's no incentive to be able to do that. So you can actually start to support a whole bunch of chains and a whole bunch of assets for, what we're seeing is this burgeoning app chain space.
It's a good take. But I also think that baby steps, right? Like, it's okay to just be doing a few chains right now. Like, I think most of the universal accounts that I've tried now are supporting the same similar 5 chains, but it's also where a lot of the action is to get these things right. Optimize, find bugs, whatever it might be. Look at different ways of scaling. But it's just I'm really bullish to hear that you guys are already thinking about that. This idea of like universalizing, blending the VMs is going to be big. We're coming to the end of the hour, and I want to sidestep the conversation a little bit. So I love to ask everyone who's building for chain abstraction for this. PMF, the industry PMF that's coming on the other side of chain abstraction. How are you looking at that? What kind of app experiences, if any, do you think are going to dominate the space? Do you see massive onboarding coming on the other side of chain abstraction, straight out the gate? Or how do you see kind of the app landscape unfolding from here on out?
Yeah, the interest upstream of apps is very high. Apps themselves, I think, need to kind of see these in the wild a bit. There needs to be a bit more social proof, and then users are going to kind of start to buy into it as more and more of these sort of like apps like come out with various sorts of integrations to enable unification of balances, spending unified balances almost instantly with no like context switch. I think the key in terms of like PMF will essentially be to ensure that the user doesn't have to keep switching context, stay in context, and be able to kind of do the things that they want to do. Maybe it's just a bunch of button clicks, but at least I'm still in context. And if I am able to kind of achieve that while doing the things that I want to do, because honestly, nobody wants to bridge, they need to bridge. And if we can just kind of take that away from people, and give them this more seamless experience. Maybe it's a few more clicks, but I think just keeping people in context and letting them have this experience is step one, and giving them this is the key part. And I think it's very important that we do not like try and overthink this to the point where there's not enough solutions, because we want other people to come out and put out their protocol. We want to see integrations happen. We want to see wallets that enable this. We want to see apps that have integrated this, because that grows the pie. And honestly, we like this may be like one of the most like seminal solutions for the industry if we look back 5 years from now. But yeah, we won't get there alone. So I think it's very important to be extremely pragmatic, take those baby steps, like you said, make rational decisions, do what works for you, put products out, and let people experience it, because that's how you get the social proof. That's how you get more and more adoption. Because I don't think there's I'm not sitting here fooled by any sort of idea that there's tons of people just waiting for us to kind of release product, as may be the case for a few other things. But yeah,
I've asked the question a few times, and I've come up with my own post-chain abstraction fantasy. So I'm going to pitch you my fantasy, and I'm curious to see how far into the future do you think we are from this being a reality, right? There's a neobank, chain abstracted neobank, right? I have stable coins in this neobank that I can, put into a lending account or whatever and have it lent out for some APR, small APR, and others just held on chain. Then I can go and make some what we might call like mature investments in RWA tokens, whatever they might be. Maybe it's like owning some real estate, a portion of real estate. Maybe it's in commodities, this kind of idea. Then there's, kind of my higher risk. And I go to other apps and I want to stake like some new yield bearing assets and do like some really big DeFi plays, and add into liquidity pools and use those LP tokens, like old school DeFi plays. But then I'm on a social fi network as well, and I want to tip my favorite creator, and maybe they've just released a new set of like NFTs, and I want to buy one. I want to join that community, give them a tip while I do it, and I'm doing it all from one point of entry. Am I just cooking this? This is not coming in the next 5 years. Is it attainable in the next 5 years? Like, what do you think? Because I think that's like kind of the industry expectation. We're cooking on crypto Twitter right now. Like we're creating this kind of fantasy world, but I'm curious to see like how far away do you think that is?
I think it's lesser than 5 years, unless we find a way to sabotage ourselves, which is very possible also. I think we do this. Many people do this all the time, because as an industry, like a sector within the space, I think we've seen this happen a lot, where someone releases some version of let's say, for example, the ZK rollup, and you have 10 people saying, "Hey, no, this doesn't work because you've not thought about this. This is not ideal enough. It's not cypherpunk enough. It's not this." And this, I think, has plagued like especially the Ethereum sort of like ecosystem for far too long. I think more people need to come in and just make pragmatic decisions, release products. And I think the great thing that we have going for ourselves with chain abstraction is that everyone seems to want to support each other. There's no real competition at the moment. There is at some like sort of like I think deeper level, but I think everyone realizes that if we don't grow the pie, we're all going to like be fighting for scraps, and that's not really worth anyone's time.
Getting to a point where you compete is a sign that we're all succeeding. So I think we all need to work together to get to a point where it makes sense to compete. Otherwise, and I think as Bernd Banksy put it when he was on the podcast, we're all fighting over 15 users, right? That makes no sense.
Exactly.
Mayur, that was awesome. And it's coming up to the end of the hour, so we'll wrap it up here. Really great to hear more about you guys' solution. Excited to see the chain come through its testnet phase and beyond there as well. Excited to take this offline as well and talk more about how our two solutions might work together. For anyone who was tuning in who wants to try Arcana, jump onto their website. You can download the Chrome extension, and I recommend that you do it. I had a fantastic time playing around. It was super easy. And super kind of bullish. I actually tweeted after, like, I don't want any more takes on bad UX, because we need to now be able to have takes on where we are right now compared to where we were, and how that signals to where we're going. So yeah, very, very bullish on what you guys are doing. Thanks for your time. And Jasper as well, thank you for your time as well. We'll catch you.
Cool.
No, absolute pleasure being here. Thank you guys so much.
Catch you tomorrow, I think, right?
Yep.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
tomorrow.
that's time to plug. Can you plug that space? What's the topic of the conversation tomorrow that Arcana is hosting?
Yeah, so tomorrow we want to do like launch party. So we'll probably just start out before you guys join. We wanted to do a demo of the wallet and what it's capable of. So we'll do that, and then right after have a bunch of you guys. I think 5 different people coming on board, all solid guys that we've known in this space and respect quite a bit, and coming on to talk about the future of chain abstraction. And I'm going to be doing my level best to not talk about like the distant future, but talk about like the tangible things that we expect to see in the next 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. That's the sort of like future that I want to like talk about. And of course, I think we can extrapolate beyond that, because I think chain abstraction has far-reaching implications. And yeah, that's the topic for tomorrow.
Oh, amazing. So that'll be streaming live on the Arcana X, correct?
Yes, our Twitter and YouTube, yes.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so if you're not following, jump onto the Arcana, notifications on. Jasper, I believe you'll be there as well. So more deep diving on what we're doing in the space as well. Super excited for that. And as you said, it's a collaborative effort right now. So 5 very strong teams going to be talking about the tangible future of chain abstraction tomorrow with Arcana. And then we're back next week with episode 5 of the SEDA Stash series as well. More on that to come. Thank you both, and enjoy the rest of your afternoons or evenings. Talk soon.
Thank you so much. Take care.